This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Every week on Hired, they run an auction where over 1,000 tech companies in San Francisco, New York, and LA bid on JavaScript developers, providing them with the salary and equity up front. The average JavaScript developer gets an average of 5 to 15 introductory offers and an average salary of over $130,000 a year. Users can either accept an offer and go right into interviewing with the company or deny them without any continuing obligations. It's totally free for users, and when you're hired, they also give you a $2,000 signing bonus as a thank you for using them. But if you use the Adventures in Angular link, you'll get a $4,000 bonus instead. Finally, if you're not looking for a job but know someone who is, you can refer them to Hired and get a $1,337 bonus if they accept a job. Go sign up at hired.com/adventuresinangular. Ready to master Angular? Oasis Digital offers Angular Bootcamp, a 3-day in-person workshop class for individuals or teams. Bring us to your site or send developers to our classes in St. Louis or San Francisco, angularbootcamp.com. This episode is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean is the provider I use to host all of my creations. All the shows are hosted there, along with any other projects I come up with. Their user interface is simple and easy to use, their support is excellent, and their VPSs are backed on solid-state drives and are fast and responsive. Check them out at DigitalOcean.com. If you use the code AngularAdventures, you'll get a $10 credit. This episode is sponsored by Telerik, the makers of Kendo UI. Kendo UI integrates seamlessly with both AngularJS 1.x and 2.0. It provides everything you need to integrate with AngularJS out of the box: bindings, component configuration, directives, template directives, form validation, event handlers, and much more. And yet, Kendo UI tooling does not depend on AngularJS, so if you want to use it with Angular or not, that's totally up to you. You can check it out at kendoui.com. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 66 of the Adventures in Angular show. This week on our panel we have Lucas Rubelkey.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. Quick shout out, early bird tickets and the call for proposals are both available for JS Remote Conf next January. So if you're interested, go check it out at jsremoteconf.com. We also have a special guest this week, and that is Uri Shaked.
Yeah, you pronounced it right.
That's shakehead to you.
I only had to say it like 10 million times to get it right. You want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, so I'm Uri, AngularJS GDE. I also have some nice open source projects which we are going to discuss today. And since this is episode number 66, I think we can also talk about the new version of Internet Explorer, AiA 6.66,
Yeah.
which was introduced last week in Angular Connect.
If you thought IE6 was hell, right?
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, and I also organized the Israeli NGConf. I organized it last year, and it was awesome. We had like 500 Angular developers attending.
Oh, nice. So you and Shai Resnick are like best friends then, right?
More than best friends.
They're frenemies.
Frenemies. No, we are more than best friends. We even have beers together sometimes.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then I also love robotics and electronics, so I do all sort of stuff with electronics. Like last year, I built xylophone out of hard drives and beer bottles. So you can find that on YouTube.
Boy, you have too much fun.
That's the plan. That's my master plan, to have too much fun. I also work for BlackBerry. When I say that, people always ask me, do they still exist? So yeah, they still exist.
Yeah, somebody's got to help the antique shop stay open, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, I forgot to mention, I also danced salsa and teach people how to dance. So if you're up to a salsa dancing lesson, you're invited.
Oh, nice. All right. Well, we brought you along today to talk about how to build directives around other libraries. And before the show, you mentioned that you have a couple. Do you want to talk about what those are real quick and what they do?
Yeah, so there is Angular Moment, which wraps Moment.js, and I think the main feature that it provides is having this 5 seconds ago. So if you want to show a user what was the last time something was modified, you could use that. And then there is also Angular Spinner, which just it's just wrapper around spin.js and lets you show nice spinner to your users while they are waiting for their Halloween customs to arrive.
Awesome. So I'm just going to dig into this because for the most part, I mean, Moment.js has some stuff to it, handling times and dates. And I mean, that can be a mess. So I can definitely see where you may want to wrap that with a directive where you can use all over the place. But the spinner, I mean, I may be using it on like 1 or 2 places on my app. So what's the advantage of having that put into a directive?
I think that if you have spin.js in your application and then you have to it's a few lines of code to wrap it in the directive, but I think it went the same for both Moment.js and spin.js. When I wanted to add them into my application, I had to either come up with my own directive. And back at that time, I wasn't really familiar with all the directives options. So I didn't know what was the best way to wrap them. And then I had to Google it and I found several approaches and several answers, and each of them had its own drawbacks. And then I thought to myself, this must be some problem that many application developers face, and spinner is a very common thing that you probably need in almost any kind of application. So I decided to take it one step ahead, and instead of just integrating the directive that I came up with into my application, wrap it as a third-party library and let other people start using it.
So it just makes it more portable? Is that really the driver behind this?
Just save time for other developers. And then I think the amazing thing about it is once you release those directives to the open source, to GitHub, you start seeing users adding features and making some things that you wouldn't even thought about. I mean, it usually starts with some bug fixes, like with the Moment.js directive, the one that says how much time ago was something. In the initial versions, I didn't clear the scope. I mean, I didn't destroy the timer when the scope was destroyed. So I got that as a pull request. But then you see people adding all sorts of features and having all sorts of suggestions. So I think it's both about saving other people's time and then also getting a better directive out of the community, a better implementation.
If I could jump in here, one other thing that I found when wrapping a third-party component in Angular is that you actually kind of surface a more idiomatic way to actually leverage that particular component. So, for instance, if you look at the spin.js website, the way to actually spin that up, is you actually have to append the spinner to some kind of DOM element, where with the Angular spinner directive is that you can actually instantiate that in an Angular way, which is going to basically promote consistency across your markup and your templates. And so that is, to me, one of the biggest advantages of taking a third-party component, wrapping it in an Angular directive, is now you can consume that directive or that component in an Angular idiomatic way that makes sense and is consistent across your entire application.
Just to pile onto that, too, it's also in the place where you expect it to be, namely, in this case, in the library, but it'll also show up in the controller instead of trying to hunt through a whole bunch of mess of jQuery to figure out where you appended that particular feature or function to your DOM element.
And that is the beauty of directives. I think one of the beautiful things of it is that a lot of times if you look at the documentation, it's like, oh, I have to query the DOM and I have to find the element I want to append this to. Whereas with a directive, they give you the element, right injected into the directive, so then you can say element dot whatever, and you can just instantiate it from there. And that's really nice that they just kind of deliver the element that you actually want to instantiate this component on.
Right. And then I think another interesting point about the Angular Moment library, now I've just started porting it into Angular 2, and when I started thinking about what it should look like with Angular 2, I realized that we no longer need to make it a directive. The reason it was a directive in Angular 1 is because it constantly had to update the DOM as time goes by. And now with Angular 2, we can use the new pipe feature, which lets us hook into the change detection and tell Angular, okay, we need to update something because I know that something should be changed. So I think that when you come to wrap some kind of third-party library, you have to see if directive is a good fit, because in some cases, filters or now pipes with Angular 2 or services can provide a better way of abstracting the third-party library.
So I guess the next question is, let's say that I have my own JavaScript library. We'll call it Chuck.js. And it does everything. You know, it walks the dog, it does authentication, and it shovels your walks in the winter. So how do I go about wrapping Chuck.js in a directive so that I can then tell Angular that these DOM elements need to behave in this way?
First of all, I think that it really depends whether this library does some kind of DOM manipulation or is some kind of reusable component.
Okay.
I think the first thing I would check is whether there is some kind of jQuery plugin which already wraps this library, or perhaps the library itself is already written as a jQuery plugin. And if this is the case, then it's probably a good candidate for a directive. And then the next thing I would probably do is find all the interaction points between the library and the DOM, and see how I can wrap it with the directive. So whenever I create a directive, I get direct access to the element where the directive is placed. So I need to make sure that this element can interact with the library. So for example, in the case of a jQuery plugin, I will probably instantiate a jQuery plugin and pass it that element. And then after I have managed to hook all the DOM stuff into the element of the directive, I would probably hook into all the events of the library and then try to hook them into the Angular digest cycle. So if it's some kind of chuck library that can chuck wood, so whenever it needs to chuck some wood, it will give me a chuck wood event, and then I would add a listener and wrap it with the Angular digest cycle with root scope apply, and then I would probably call some user-provided function to expose this event. Now there is also another part. I usually want to listen to the attributes or the scope of my directive and update the component accordingly. And I think I can divide it into two subtypes of components. So if the component is just displaying some kind of value or adding some kind of animation or something like that to the DOM, I will usually use the scope to communicate values in and out. But then if it's more like a kind of input element, such as date picker or some nice kind of slider, I'll probably use ngModel for that. So I can tell Angular whenever the value changes, and it will be able to run all the validations and take care of the two-way data bindings. So I think that distinction is also important.
So do you want to walk us through briefly how you built Angular Moment or Angular Spinner?
Yeah, so let's go with Angular Moment. So I'm right here looking at the GitHub for Angular Moment, and I can see that my first commit was 2.5 years ago when I started building my first big Angular application, and I needed this directive. And then at some point I decided it was 30 lines of code, and I decided, okay, this can be useful for somebody else, so I'm going to upload it to GitHub. And it was a really simple repository, just a Bower JSON file, the Angular module with just the time ago directive, and it was 30 lines. And then in order to help other people discover this directive, I registered it on ng modules. And then I also went to Stack Overflow to look for people asking, how do I integrate Angular and Moment and show that time ago component that automatically updates. And I put a link there. And I also published it to Bower. And it received some attention, but I think that the real benefit of like publishing stuff on GitHub as open source is getting the contributions and the feedback from the community. And what I've learned is that you need to take some steps to make it easier for the community to contribute back to your project. So in my case, I think that about a month after I published just the very bare-bone directive, I started adding some stuff that will help people contribute. So it started with unit tests. So whenever somebody contributed, he could run the unit tests and see that he didn't break anything. And it also helped to set a standard. So whenever somebody contributes, you will see how the library is supposed to be used, what are the use cases, and then also write his own tests. And then I also added some code linting using JSIN, integrated it with Travis CI. Eventually, I also started providing contributing guidelines, so people will have basic understanding of how they prepare their development environment, how they clone the project, how they run the tests, what are the requirements from them whenever they send a pull request. And I think that those things are really essential once you decide to go ahead and publish your directives or third-party libraries on GitHub.
That was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
It actually had, I mean, I know we were talking about, components in Angular, but that was actually a pretty interesting, I think, I don't want to say tangent, but like parallel thought about just how to actually prepare a repository for consumption by the community. So it's like, excellent. Thanks for sharing.
And contribution by the community, I would add.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, thanks. I think in Shai Resnick's My Friend and Me words, I would say community, transpilers. Yeah, you get the ones.
There. So, Uri, tell me, somebody was going to approach this. I know we've kind of, touched upon this in a few different ways, but let's say somebody had a great component that they wanted to use and they wanted to wrap it in Angular. Just walk us through kind of this checklist one more time about how they would approach this. So, I mean, I know we have talked about bits and pieces, but just give me the summary. So let's say we're in an elevator and you have like 1 minute to kind of give me the high level details of things that I need to do to wrap a component in an Angular directive.
All right. So assume that this is like a component and you want to isolate it from the other parts of the applications to make it reusable.
Yep.
So first of all, you define an Angular directive with an isolate scope. And then you figure out what would the inputs and the outputs of the component be. If it's like an input component, then you will want to use ngModel and ngModel controller to communicate in and out of the directive. Otherwise, you would probably want to use two-way bindings or event bindings on the isolate scope. And then you need to figure out how the third-party library interfaces with the DOM and hook it up with Angular change detection mechanism and the directives element. And finally, you sometimes want to add some custom logic. So in case of Angular Moment.js does not really provide the functionality to automatically update the time. So in my case, I just need to set up some timers and do the extra mile so you could just use the component and enjoy it without having to think about the updates.
And then make a
And then our 1 minute is over.
Oh man.
That was too short a minute.
That was too short a minute. And so just to kind of add on top of that, I actually have, if you go to my repositories on GitHub, I have actually an Angular Chosen repository. So I was using the Chosen plugin, which is kind of this neat multi-select drop down. I wrapped it in Angular and a few people have actually used it. One company actually reached out to me and said, can we use this, with like, and like under the license and everything. So I had to sign some paperwork and I got a t-shirt and that was pretty neat. But I found that when doing this, first of all, does this component, like what events does it surface? And so for instance, when somebody actually selects something in the chosen dropdown, there's actually an event that fires. And so then I have to listen to that in Angular. And then as Uri said, I need to kick off a digest cycle. But occasionally what's interesting is something will happen in Angular and you actually need to refresh the component and actually let the component know that something has happened. And so I've actually had to submit a few pull requests to some of these components because they didn't actually have a way to kind of force a refresh. And so, that's really, the big thing to focus on is, what are the outputs in terms of events so that you can listen to and update your Angular app. But also, how do you actually force, kind of an update within the actual component that you're wrapping? Do they have like an update method or a refresh method or something like that to say, hey, something happened in Angular. I need this thing to kind of redraw itself. And so, it's actually went both ways in terms of, updating your Angular repository around the component, but I've actually had to submit, PRs back to the component to say, hey, you don't really have a good way to update yourself, dynamically, because a lot of them are actually written to like take existing DOM elements on the page and then, turn them into essentially this component with extended functionality. Whereas with Angular, things are definitely like dynamic and, you might have an ng repeat with a component. And it's not designed for that. So it's kind of interesting to see that two-way, contribution where you actually contribute back to the component to make it work well with Angular.
Well, the other thing
that's a really good point.
The author isn't going to think of every use case. And so when you have your own use case, that's exactly where you want to contribute like you're talking about there, Lucas.
And so that's even, I think one is the Angular community benefits, but, it's really interesting to see how you can actually allow or update or contribute back to the component so that if, somebody wants to wrap it in, some other framework, those hooks are already there for them to refresh. Because, sometimes, or at least I know for myself, is if I'm writing a directive or something I'm going to release, it's for a specific use case, for a problem that I'm trying to solve, and I haven't thought of everything. And so a lot of times these repository authors are very responsive to these kind of updates and contributions. They just haven't thought of it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I also had case like this when I needed to update a third-party component that wasn't really built to be updated. And I just ended up like whenever the Angular scope updated, I needed to remove the component from the DOM and build a new one, which was kind of a pain in the ass. But sometimes you don't have a choice.
True story, bro.
All right. Well, I know we have a hard stop coming up for some of the folks on the call. Is there anything else that we definitely should tackle before we get to the picks?
So I think we should do a pre-pick pick, and that is Uri and I were at Angular Connect, and I think maybe we should just take, just real quick, a minute or two, and just kind of talk about, some of the neat things that we saw there.
Sure.
You're first, Uri.
All right. So I really like the Connect part of Angular Connect. I really enjoyed the conference and I think the speakers were awesome. I made a few new friends with both speakers and participants. I wish it was one day longer though. And I think that I was really positively surprised to find some talks about the soft skills. Well, those are my picks from Angular Connect.
And so my picks were, one is I think this is the first time that I think the community has really got a sense of like, this is what Angular 2 is going to be. And up to, I think, this point, Angular 2 had been kind of this nebulous kind of concept out in the ether. And we had some kind of hints and some ideas of kind of what it looked like, but it was kind of from, when you stare at a shadow and you're like, okay, I think I know what this looks like, or I think I know what it's going to be. And for me, kind of sitting through the talks and the keynote, I thought that it really started to kind of come together for me. The fact that, we're building TypeScript or ES6 and we're really leveraging this, these language features and these standards. And then we're just decorating that functionality or those language features with the Angular framework. And so it really truly to me kind of clicked like this is a platform in which we can build some really, really serious applications. And so the talk that actually Shai Resnick and I gave, called the real, air quotes, Angular keynote, and it was really a serious 5-minute talk, but wrapped in 20 minutes of just nonsense, is the point we were trying to make is that we have better tools and a better language, which makes for a much better framework that allows us to build better things faster. And I just believe that more than ever is that, with the modern tooling, with ES6 and TypeScript, we have a much better language. And because of that, Angular 2 solves a lot of the problems that Angular 1 had, but it also brings additional features to solve problems that we didn't even know we had. And it's just a really exciting time to be a front-end developer, a web application developer, but also an Angular developer. So, Chuck, what was your favorite part of Angular Connect?
I wasn't there.
That was your favorite part.
I did not have to get on an airplane.
That was.
I mean, it sounded like there was a lot there. The last episode of this show that we recorded last week, I mean, we talked a lot about what happened there and what the announcements were and some of the other things. It sounded like it was a tremendous conference. So, maybe next year. This year, we were just a little too close to having a baby here. So I couldn't leave my wife 8 months pregnant and go to a conference in London.
It's your own peril, my friend. I think you made the right choice.
Yeah, I don't know which would have gotten me killed faster, going to London without my wife or leaving her here with 4 kids while she's 8 months pregnant. So,
Death Wish, either way.
That's right. All right, well, should we get to some picks? More picks? Better picks?
Sure.
Less better picks?
Yeah.
Uri, give us your picks!
So my picks for this week are first of all the ES 2016 colon operator, which is supposed to replace the bind this that we need to call whenever we register an event listener or so. It's still a stage 0 proposal, so I really hope it will make it to the language at some point. And then I have another one. It's a game called Bullshit, which a few friends of mine are building with Angular 2. It's still in early stages. They worked on it during Angular 2 Hack Night we had in Israel last month. And it's a nice game. You get questions and you have to make up lies, and then you need to trick your friends to think, to choose your answer instead of the correct answer.
All right.
Are you telling me the truth right now, or does that game really exist? I was kidding. You see what I did there. So, my pick is a post that I saw on Medium. So it's Angular Introduction to Reactive Extensions. So, Rob Wormald really got me excited about RxJS and just streams. And so Ben Lesh, actually, he gave a phenomenal talk at Angular Connect. And this post by Gerard Sands it just talks about Angular and reactive extensions. And I found it to be really well written, really easy to follow. And I'm just super excited about observables, kind of reactive extension programming. And I think it's excellent. So check it out. The link will be in the show notes.
Did you subscribe?
Well, I see you're trying to lure me into a joke.
Did I succeed?
You did. It took me a second.
Yeah.
I'm like, subscribe to Medium? No. Oh, I get it.
All right. I've got a pick here. I've got a couple, actually. This one I haven't picked on this show. I have talked about it on other shows, but I really like having houseplants in my office. I just like having some green, and I actually managed to water my plants on a regular basis, so they're not dead yet. I did have I have a little, I don't know what you call it, but it's kind of a palm tree. It's got big palm leaves on it. It's a house plant. And yeah, I did leave it out of the sun for a while, so it nearly died, but I moved it back up on my desk and now it's happy again. But anyway, I got these plant choices from a TED Talk, and I'll just put a link here in the show notes. It's called How to Grow Fresh Air. And I just bought these plants, and I like having them in my office. I am actually tempted to, so I have a big window in my office, and I'm actually tempted to put, get some herbs, so maybe some basil or something, and have fresh basil growing in my office. I think that'd be great. And I think it'd smell good in here. But anyway, so yeah, that's one pick. Another pick, I get a lot of people asking me, so I did this between my last two shows that I did this week. I've been getting asked about my podcasting setup. So I did a Periscope about it, and I'll put a link in to that in the show notes as well. I need to put it up on my blog. Right now, you can find it. It's on catch.me. But yeah, I want to embed it in my blog and then give people links to everything that I use. If you're interested in that, then keep an eye out. And those are my picks.
Okay, what about the directive for growing plants in Angular? I think we need one.
Oh, I think so too. I think we need a watering directive and a sunlight directive.
Watter.
All right, well, that was awesome. Thanks, Woody.
Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Shaky Head.
You're welcome, Lukey.
You're the best.
Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more. Do you want to have conversations with the Adventures in Angular crew and their guests? Do you want to support the show? Now you can. Go to adventuresinangular.com/forum and sign up today.